Chapter 7. Malini. Malini arrived back to the camp with her lungs full of smoke and her body crawling with a sense of memory. The smell of burning flesh in the hair and cloth. The sweetness of ghee and perfume mingling with the char of living women burning. Alori and Narina on fire before her, the scent of them and the sound of their screams filling her and hollowing her. She nearly fell from her war chariot, would have if Razia had not caught her. Strong hands, living flesh. At least this woman lived. Empress, Razia said, holding up Malini so firmly that her hands would surely leave bruises. The soldiers are watching. Remember yourself. They were the words of an elder to a younger woman who had failed herself. Don't let them see you weak, that voice said, and the strength of it gave Malini the push to remember herself and the person she had to be. Malini forced herself to nod and straighten, throwing her shoulders back, holding her head high. Guards were running toward her. The battle had not lasted long. The High Prince's rider had drawn back into the walls of the maze fort swiftly, taking their fire with them. Coiling, she had heard soldiers say frantically, back onto swords and arrows, ready to use again. She could see the forces of her army milling about, at loose ends, now that the threat was gone. Whispers of the words "Mother's fire" drifted into her ears, seeped like poison into her blood. She stepped down from the chariot. "Take me to Lord Mahesh," she said, to the nearest guard. "Yes, Empress," he said, and turned, clearing a path before her, his companions moving to guide her. She expected Razia to follow, but there was nothing but silence behind her, and when she turned, she saw that Razia had lowered herself to the floor of the chariot, pale, clutching her skull. Malini began to walk to her and was stopped by a hand on her arm. "I'll take her to the Lord Khalil, Empress," a male Dwalali archer said. His eyes were bloodshot from smoke. "She'll be seen to. I vow it." "Don't take her to her husband," Malini said. "Take her to a physician." "Empress," he said again and bowed, then walked to Razia and climbed into the chariot with her. Malini watched for one heartbeat, then sucked in her breath and forced herself to turn away. This was a political crisis in the making. There was no time to indulge her own finer feelings, to allow herself to worry or wait, or feel the clawing voice at the back of her skull that howled fire, fire. Like ghosts, her heart sisters flickered before her eyes, so she thought instead of what must be done, here and now, to shore up her defenses. She thought of what actions she could take in order to see her continue on her journey toward the throne. She pressed the thoughts into her own skin like a mask, like something that could stop her from flying apart. She found herself in Lord Mahesh's own tent. She wanted to tell him to summon Rao for her, to find Lata and her military officials, and any Parijatipan lords who could swiftly be gathered up. She needed Lord Khalil and Lord Naranyan and beady-eyed Lord Prakesh. She needed to draw her council around herself and plan to strategize and weigh up resources and count the dead. She needed to carve a path forward. One look at Lord Mahesh's grimly furious face and his shoulder through the tent's curtain told her that none of that would be possible. Not yet. "Empress," he said, voice rough as smoke. "We must speak. Alone." "We are alone, Lord Mahesh," she said. His gaze flicked to the guards. "Leave us," she announced, waving a hand at her guards. They hesitated for a moment, but Malini gestured once more and said evenly, "Lord Mahesh will ensure I am safe. Go, stand beyond the door." It was only when they were gone, taking up post outside the tent as ordered, of that Malini had no doubt, that Malini allowed herself to inspect Mahesh more closely. His face was cut, a long line of blood snaked across his cheek. His clothing was torn, ash had stained the Parijati white of his tunic a dull gray. Mahesh stared back at her, his eyes narrowed, red from the miasma of smoke. Lord Mahesh had served her ably since his appointment, but now she looked at him and thought of how he had not sounded the conch on the battlefield, how she had in all her helpless panic been forced to risk her own life to do it. As if hearing her thoughts, he spoke. "You should not have sounded retreat, Empress," he said. "That was a grave error." "My men were in danger," Malini said levelly. "It was a massacre of our forces. They were burning. I was not going to allow it to continue. As my general, you should not have allowed it to continue." "I should have and would have," he said. "I would have let hundreds die if need be. That is the nature of war, Empress. Those men should have died gladly. You should have trusted my judgment. I was not trained in the military arts alongside my brothers, Lord Mahesh, but I know a strategy that results in nothing but wasteful death when I hear one, she replied sharply. You know I sought to end the war for Sakata with minimal bloodshed. Why then would you choose a strategy, without my say-so, that would see my army burn? A battle is not simply a balance of lives, he gritted out, looking more furious by the minute. Empress, a battle is a tale written in blood, and this is the tale that men shall tell about your retreat. Before the High Prince's fort, the Emperor Chandra sent a priest of the Mothers, who brought with him blessed fire of the Mothers, fire that once destroyed the Yaksa, fire that now proclaims the Emperor's mother-blessed right to the throne, and condemns you as a usurper. They will say the traitor Empress saw the fire of the Mothers, and knowing she was a false claimant to the throne, tainted in the eyes of the Mothers she claimed to serve, she fled. It beat as he allowed the words to sink in. Do you understand, Empress? What a leap to make! Unlimited evidence, Malini said tightly. I do not believe people will make such an assumption, Lord Mahesh, and if they did, they would be entirely wrong to do so. They will think it, Empress. I am sure of that. How can you be sure? Malini thought. But she did not ask. As soon as the question came to her, she knew its answer. He thought it. That was why. Her own general had gazed upon that fire and felt his faith in her crumble. That was not the fire of the Mothers aflame, Malini said with far more conviction than she felt. It was no natural fire, Mahesh replied, his voice quieter now, steadier. What else could it have been but their flames? This is what the people will say and believe. They will say the Mothers did not choose you for the throne after all. They will say you are not the rightful ruler. Righteousness, rightfulness. Oh, how she hated those words. The sole purpose seemed to be to keep her in her place. A life with narrow walls and standards of purity that pressed her thin, erased her to nothing but her blood and her good bones and the worth of a pleasing face. A life where she would never contemplate ruling. A life where she would obediently bare her neck for a knife or gladly embrace the pyre. I am the rightful ruler of Parijatripa, Malini said. And that fire was not the flame of the Mothers. Must I continue to repeat it, Lord Mahesh? Perhaps if she said these words often enough with enough assurance, they would wear a grove into reality and become unassailably true. And as a rightful ruler, I have no desire to waste the lives of those who serve me. I could not have allowed more men to burn for the sake of obeying laws that Chandra himself does not respect. The word burn brought the harshness to her voice, broke the even calm she had so carefully maintained all through this exchange. His eyes sharpened at the sound of it. Empress, he said. Malini. Oh no, she thought. Familiarity did not bode well. I understand if the sight reopened old wounds, he said delicately. I have led men to many battles, Lord Mahesh, Malini said, still cursing herself internally. She knew the price of weakness. She knew. I am not fragile. But fire, of course, it would be understandable. You were there, Lord Mahesh, when I burned down a monastery, she replied, voice like iron. I set it alight with my own arrow. Fire does not frighten me. It did, of course. Even today she had nightmares. Perhaps she always would. You should rest, Lord Mahesh said, as if he had not heard her. There will be time enough to discuss what must be done. For now you must recover from this ordeal. As if she could allow herself the luxury of rest. There would not be enough time, as he claimed. The urgency of the work ahead of her made it difficult to look at him without anything but incredulous anger. You acted as you did in error, Empress, but we may still be able to right it. We can move forward on this when the camp is more peaceful. As if to underscore his words, there was another crash from beyond the tent's walls, an indecipherable shouting. I would rather summon the other lords now, she said, controlled. I would rather discuss how we must proceed. And I, he said with more steel, think it would be better for you to recover. That is my advice. Respectfully, Empress. Silence fell. This was defiance. Oh, Lord Mahesh could speak of respect all he liked, but he knew his worth to her. She thought of standing taller, thought of saying to him, "I am your empress, and you will obey me." She thought of all the things her father would have done in her position, or her brothers, or any emperor, any faceless man garbed in power. "You would never have spoken to me so," she thought, her blood a deep river of anger that swelled and moved inside of her, threatening to flood the plains of her heart. "If I were either of my brothers, and yet I am a better leader than both of them, in every way." "Perhaps you're right," she said, and let herself sag a little, shoulders rounding as if exhaustion had overcome her. "I will rest, Lord Mahesh, and then, later, we will discuss what must be done." Her own tent, like everywhere else in the camp, smelled of burning, but the scent was fainter here. Swati had swept the floor and perfumed the air. She had arranged bowls of water to trap the smoke. They were all waiting for her, Deepa and Lata, and to Malini's surprise and relief, Razia. Her head was wrapped in cloth, her hair bound to one side. Sahar, still bloodied and ash-stained, stood at the entrance of the tent, acting as another guard. Lata strode over to very second Malini entered the tent. "Milady," she said, gaze flickering anxiously over Malini's face. "Her clothes. Are you hurt? What happened out there? Why did you go to Lord Mahesh without me? Shall I summon Rao? He's seeing to his men, but I can ask—" "No," Malini shook her head. "Everyone I need is here." "I've arranged you bathing water," Swati said softly. "Refresh yourself, my lady. You'll feel much better." "Are you well, Lady Razia?" Malini asked. "You should be resting." There was a pointed hum of agreement from the tent entrance. "You should have waited for me," Razia said. Her hands were clenched in her lap. It took a moment for Malini to realize that the flinty look upon her face was anger. "I was indisposed," she said stiffly. "But Empress, you should have waited for me, or if not for me, then Lata or Lady Deepa." "My father would not have allowed me there," Deepa blurted out, then flushed. A look passed between Lata and Malini. Nothing was said. Malini moved behind the privacy screen and unraveled her sari, let it fall into a heap behind her, knowing she would never willingly wear it again. After a perfunctory wash with a cloth and a bucket, her hands shaking despite herself, she dressed again in clean clothing. She unbraided her hair as she walked back into the main tent, ran a comb through it in long, thoughtless motions, waiting for her heartbeat to settle. Swati made a soft noise. "Let me, milady," she said, and took up the task, swiftly drawing Malini's hair into a new braid. Another of Razia's archers entered the tent. "There's a war council being held," she said, her voice urgent. "Right now. The Empress will be ready in a moment. Tell the men—" "No, milady," the guardswoman said. "You don't understand. The council has started and they have chosen not to summon the Empress." She swallowed and said weakly, "It was one of our Lord's men who told me, my lady, on Lord Khalil's behalf." Silence. Razia said, "We may attend regardless, of course, Empress." Her voice was cold, all fury, and it suppressed. "We will ensure you have an appropriate retinue with you. All of us will be by your side." Deepa squirmed a little at that, but Razia continued calmly, "Nothing will be amiss." They all looked at Malini, waiting for her response. "No," she said. She would not go to them unprepared. She would not go with shaking hands and fire flickering behind her eyelids. That wasn't how wars were won. "How do you celebrate battles being won in Dwarali?" "With drinking," Razia said. "And battles not yet won?" "Battles lost, Empress?" "I do not know. We don't lose battles in Dwarali, and if we do, we don't survive." "It is lucky, then, that Parijatripa is a vast empire, full of many paths, and that we women knew something of rising anew from the flames of ruin," Malini said. "Swati," she said, "arrange for wine to be brought. We are all going to remain here, in this tent, and celebrate our continued survival." "And sherbet," Sahar muttered. "Wine's no good for those with bleeding heads." Razia gave her a narrow-eyed look. Malini said swiftly, with a pang of annoyance at herself for her own oversight, that sherbet would be ideal. Wine and sherbet were poured. Malini told them what had happened outside the High Prince's fort, and watched as Lata's face grew tighter and her eyes more calculating, as she considered the implications of what had passed. She observed the way Deepa shrank further in on herself, like a small prey creature seeking to conceal itself from danger. "Deepa," Malini said finally. Deepa startled visibly, then settled back onto her cushion. "If you wish to see your father, you may go. He must be worried for your well-being." I don't need to see him, Empress. My apologies." "Will he not want to see you? Ensure your health?" Malini inquired. Deepa shook her head. "No, Empress." "Then I must in his place." "Are you well?" Malini asked. "It was frightening for Razia and me to face fire on the battlefield, but it is frightening, too, not to know what may be coming for you." "I am well, Empress," Deepa said. "Thank you for your concern." Malini allowed a moment to pass as more smoke-filled air wafted in through the tent curtain, as Deepa clasped her hands tighter under the watchful eyes of Malini's inner court. "Did you want to serve me, Deepa?" Malini asked softly. "I am afraid I have not asked you since war began in earnest." Deepa hesitated. "Was it your father's will or your own to serve me?" Malini pressed. Deepa lowered her gaze. "My father asked it of me," she said, "but I was happy to come." Malini nodded slowly. "Of course you were," she agreed. "You are an obedient daughter. Your first loyalty is to your father. You love him, and he controls your fate, your marriage or lack, your status. All of us understand this," Malini went on. "And I understand and forgive you for watching me for his sake and your own." Deepa lifted her gaze, eyes a little wider, a little wild. "Empress," she blurted out, "I have said nothing, nothing." She stopped and seemed to steel herself, then said, "I am the third of 5 daughters, not the prettiest or the most charming. My father, he only wished to give me an opportunity to rise." Malini was silent for a moment. "What did you tell him about me, Deepa?" "Nothing, Empress. Nothing." "Be honest with me now," Malini said, low and chiding. "Don't let your panic mislead you. You're intelligent, educated. Lata speaks highly of your mind. Tell me what you have told your father. Tell me what I am in your eyes." Deepa hesitated. Empress, you are dedicated to winning this war, and you work tirelessly. You are always as you are," she said haltingly, gesturing jerkily toward Malini. "You are brave and poised, a true heir to Divyanshi. I have told my father this." "And what else?" When Deepa remained quiet, Malini leaned forward. The other women watched, tense and silent. "Compliments and flattery are well and good, Deepa, but I know they are not all you say. I am asking you for the truth." Deepa was intelligent and thoughtful. Malini could practically see the thoughts flitting through the younger woman's mind, tightening her jaw, making her mouth part on words she couldn't quite say, then close again. Finally Deepa came to a decision. Her gaze hardened. "You speak of the mothers," she said, "and you, Empress, you speak of being mother-blessed, but you do not pray or speak to the mothers." Her confidence grew, her voice wavering less as she continued. "You are not gentle or kind. You try to be, but there's a coldness in you, Empress. You do not forget those who slight you." Alarm rose in her face as she said swiftly, "But I did not tell my father so." "Why not? Do you think it insults me?" When Deepa only looked more panicked, Malini smiled, letting her voice gentle with it. "I wanted your honesty, and I thank you for it. And in return I have some honesty for you. Your father has lost his faith in me, and your father holds great sway among certain factions of my allies." Malini's decision to make him her general had only strengthened his power. "I would like to know what he does, what he says or does not say. Watch him for me. Tell me what you learn, and you will be rewarded with more power in my court than you could ever achieve as an unfavored daughter in your father's household." My family, Deepa said haltingly. My sisters, my mother. I need to know that they will be safe. If you are your father's son and I your emperor, you could ask me for assurances that you would be recognized as the head of your family, Malini said. If you chose the empire's future over your father's ambitions and errors, you could ask me to vow that your sisters would be protected and given a future unbound from your father's fate. Deepa swallowed. I am not a son. I am not an emperor. So what will you do, Lady Deepa? She looked away. She looked at Lata and Razia and Zahar, at Swati, watching quietly. Slowly the panic seemed to bleed from her face. My father bid me serve you. I did not say no. I did not even try to refuse. She met Malini's eyes again. I wanted more. Is it selfish to want even more than this, Empress? Are you leading me astray? Her eyes asked. It is not selfish to serve your empire, Malini said steadily, and it is not selfish to protect your family from your father's errors. And he has erred, Deepa. You have in your hands the power to right his wrongs. Will you do so? Deepa swallowed. I have always wanted more, she confessed. Always wanted purpose. I know, Malini said, looking at Deepa with all her focus, all the charm she could force into her own voice and eyes and body. Let Deepa know she was seen. Let Deepa know she was valued. It was true enough, surely, to grasp her loyalty and chain it fast. I know. I want the assurances you spoke of, Deepa said. I want to know I will be rewarded, and my family shall be safe, and in return, Empress, I will tell you everything of my father, and I will be your loyal servant, as I always have been. Malini smiled. Later, much later, she sat with no company but Lata, and thought of how else she might protect herself from men who had stopped seeing her as a living god. When this began, she said quietly, watching Lata raise her head attentive, I believed I would have the empire in my grasp by now, or that I would be dead. Sometimes she thought she would spend the rest of her life like this, on broken roads, surrounded by armed men, always negotiating webs of politics and power with allies who bowed and bristled and measured her worth to them as she measured theirs in turn. She would always be one step away from success or from ruin. She would never see Chandra dead. Could something be achieved by sheer force of want alone? Lata sat on the ground, cross-legged, back straight. She sat in the pose of a sage at debate, ready to help Malini unravel the thorny knot blooming in her own skull. Malini calculated a new path forward. Bring me Yogesh, she said, lighting the oil wick lantern by her papers, collecting her writing instruments close, ink, thick sheaf of paper. Try not to draw any attention to yourself, Lata. Lata nodded and left without another word. Malini thought of the power of a tale, the way it could splinter into shards and cut the throat of its own maker. The tale of a crown prince turned priest, a firstborn son, still held more sway than the myth she'd wound around herself from prophecy and fire and her own sheer ambition. She needed a weapon no one else had. She wanted someone she could trust. Someone who had loved her even after a knife to the throat, who had held Malini's face in her own two hands, warm and alive, and said, I know you. I know this face, and it is mine. She had dreamt of writing to Priya again so many times. She had written to Priya so many times. I am always thinking of you. I think of you in battle. I think of you in the dark of night. When my mind is silent or full, you wait there for me. It galls me that I want you as much as this, that my heart so thoroughly belongs to you. The power you have over me, Priya, why does it refuse to fade? I think of the way the earth would yield to your hands, flowering for you. To think of what you could do for me if I put you to use, and I should put you to use. Somewhere you must wonder why I haven't. I think how you could have made a weapon of anything. Do you think of me in the quiet? I wonder. No more. She could not think of it any longer. She wrote a different letter, not for Priya, or at least not for Priya alone. She wrote as Empress with the weight of her status behind her words and none of her heart. She hoped Priya would understand anyway. She hoped Priya would come. For the sake of the alliance between the Empire and Ahiranya, and for the sake of what still lay between them, or at least lay inside Malini, turning forever to the memory of Priya like a thing of the earth seeking light.